Hi everybody and welcome. I'm Randy Schrum, an audit partner with Marshall Jones. Thank you for joining us today as we have a very special board bite presented by the Georgia Center for Nonprofits. Today we'll be focusing on endowments, and I brought two very impressive, very special guests with us today. Both are nonprofit experts and well known throughout the Georgia community. First, we have Mary Ellen Garrett. She is the Senior Vice President and Wealth Management Advisor for the Garrett Group at Merrill, and also her business partner, Patsy Garrett. She is the Assistant Vice President and Senior Financial Advisor to discuss endowments with all of us today and to share their best practices. So Mary Ellen and Patsy, thank you so much for being with us today. The Garrett Group at Merrill works with several organizations that are members of the Georgia Center for Nonprofits, including management of several endowments. May I ask you to share how you work with nonprofits to build and grow their endowments?
Randy, thank you for the nice introduction and for the topic that we're going to discuss today. And you're correct, we do work with many organizations and we help them build and grow their endowments within the guidelines of their investment policy statement. First, I want to explain what an endowment is and what its purpose is for a nonprofit organization. An endowment is, for the most part, used to support nonprofit operations, and it's funded with annual contributions from permanent, long-term investment pools. So for private foundations, endowments are typically created by a donor or a family from a pool of assets given at one time, or they can be given over a period of years. For other nonprofits, educational institutions, community foundations, healthcare organizations, and the like, endowments are typically made up of individual gifts from donors who set guidelines on how their gift is to be used and occasionally how their gift is to be invested. Members of the nonprofit board, governed by the investment policy and spending practices, are charged with crafting and overseeing the nonprofit's activities. This is done in accordance with the nonprofit's investment policy statement.
So Mary Ellen, you mentioned this investment policy statement. Can you explain what that is and why it's so important?
Sure, absolutely. The most important set of actions that the nonprofit and its board can take with respect to endowment investing is the development and regular review of the policies and procedures that will govern the investment process for the endowment. These are embodied in an investment policy statement, or sometimes called an IPS, which is a key document that is adopted by the board and that should be reviewed on an annual basis. Here are some of the questions to consider when formulating your organization's investment policy statement. Questions like, what is the purpose of the fund? What are its sources and how is it to be used? What are the endowment's return goals? What is the risk level that is appropriate for the organization? What investment strategies are permitted, and in some cases, what investment strategies are prohibited? And what is the organization's liquidity policy for the endowment? The organization should also consider whether it will engage in any of the investment practices that come under the general heading of responsible or sustainable investing. And that's including environmental, social, and governance, also referred to as ESG.
Thanks. So once an organization has their investment policy statement in place, how do you, as their advisor, invest the endowment appropriately? And what types of returns would a nonprofit normally expect from their endowment?
That's a great question and a really good next steps to this, but I'd like to preface this by saying that each endowment is shaped differently, and it's based on the organization's goals, so that the investment the investment of one endowment bucket might look completely different based on the nonprofit's needs and the parameters that may be set by the donor. The board and the nonprofit must take care to align the asset allocation of their endowment within the defined risk parameters and the time horizon that is presented in the investment policy statement. We can then gauge a hypothetical rate of return based on these factors. Governance, as you know, of an endowment's investment is in most cases a collective enterprise involving the work of the organization's staff, the investment committee, and the full board acting in its role as overseer. We work very closely with each of the nonprofits and meet with them regularly to make sure that the overall investment for their endowment is aligned with their investment policy statement at all times.
Okay, so once a nonprofit organization has their investment policy statement in place, how do you, as their advisors, invest the endowment appropriately, and what types of returns would a nonprofit expect in their endowment?
Well, that's a great question and a really good next step on this. And I'd like to preface it by saying that each endowment is shaped differently based on the organization's goals. So the investment of one endowment bucket might look completely different based on the nonprofit's needs and the parameters that may be set by the donor. The board and the nonprofit must take care to align the asset allocation of their endowment within the defined risk parameters and the time horizon that's presented in the investment policy statement. We can then gauge a hypothetical rate of return based on these factors.
And the governance of an endowment's investments is in most cases a collective enterprise, involving the work of organization staff, the investment committee, and the full board, acting in its role of overseer. We work very closely with each nonprofit and meet with them regularly to make sure the overall investment for their endowments is in line with their investment policy statement at all times.
That's fantastic. So thank you both, Mary Ellen and Patsy, for your time today. That was fantastic. We're going to look forward to seeing you next time, because what we're going to do is share how your group helps organizations maintain and manage their endowments. And also, please join us for September 30th at 4 o'clock for a live Georgia Center for Nonprofits panel discussion. The title is Fiduciary Oversight 101, Investment Policy and Financial Governance for Nonprofits. And that's actually going to be recorded. It's going to be available on the Georgia Center for Nonprofits website for later viewing. During that panel discussion, it'll be Mary Ellen and myself. We'll be joined by Kathy Keeley. She's the Executive Vice President of Programs for the Georgia Center for Nonprofits. Also Bill Jarvis. He's really a national nonprofit expert aligned with your group, the Bank of America. And also Michael Dunlap. He's going to be the treasurer for the Center for Puppetry Arts. And we look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you.